So we started painting this model with the skin like we normally do, and what you can see straight away here is that I've actually primed the model in the sort of base green that's going to be used over a lot of the model. Now this is just to sort of save time and speed things up a little bit later on down the line, and because it's quite a mid-tone, it's quite easy to paint other colours over the top of this. So the basic skin tone was a mix of beige red and mahogany with a little bit of Bordeaux red in there, just to give it a little pink tint. Now, as I work through this, the skin, I'm adding light orange to it to add those sort of mid-tone skin tones that have that orangey feel to them. And then right at the end of the highlights, I start adding in more and more pale yellow. Now I wanted this skin to look more like a sort of bronzed flesh that we see on more muscular guys especially. So I really wanted to work from a sort of dark reddish pink colour up into those sort of orangey, almost yellowy highlights. So that's why I've gone with the light orange and moving more into that sort of pale yellow. But the pale yellow is put on very, very sparingly. It's only tiny little bits to give us those sort of glints of light on the skin. So as you can see here, that I'm just adding very small parts and the paint is very thin. Now to finish this off, I wanted a bit more depth in the shadows, so I've thinned down burnt red. It's very, very thin, and I go over and over this many times, just glazing into the shadow areas and adding more depth where it's required. Now we have two sort of greens on the main part of the model here. And I've used the same base coat for both, which was ocean blue and alga green mixed together. Now for the first highlights on this section of green, I'm adding in alga green. Now I build up this to be, I wanted this to be a more yellowy type of green. So I want these two greens to look similar but be different, if you know what I mean. They need to contrast with each other like they're different materials. So this part of the green, we're adding in alga green and grass green, which are both quite highly sort of saturated yellowy colours. So we're pushing this along with the hat to this more yellowy tone, which makes them stand out a little bit more from the other green we're going to paint next, which will be more of a white base green. Now once I've got up to the most highlighted colours I got here, I added in pale yellow to finish off with the highest highlights. And you can see on the hat here how much that rim really pops once I add that pale yellow into the final mix. Now moving on to this second green on the Mini. And this is very much, it's all his sort of undershirt and his cloak and a couple of little bits that are around there. And over top of the alga green and ocean blue base coat, I've now gone in with a whiter green, which is intermediate green. And what I do here is I build up the main tones with this intermediate green. And as you can see, it's a much different effect from the first green. We're using the same base colour, so we're sort of recycling what we've already done here by using the same base colour, but we're making it look very different by using a completely different level of saturation and highlight colour over the top. Intermediate green is a green that's got quite a bit of white in it. So we tend to get this more desaturated white green. And to finish this off, I come in with that commonality colour again, which is the pale yellow, but again has got a lot of white in it, so it works well here. And we get these nice crisp, much whiter highlights on the final finish. Now for the leathers, what I've done here is I've used burnt umber and king purple as the base tone. I wanted a very dark sort of purpley brown here. Now we've gone on with the first highlight here, which is pure dark rust. Now there's a couple of really good rust colours from AK, and they work really well for leathers. You really get this beautiful sort of orangey brown tone. So I build up the whole of the first lights with this dark rust. I then come in with pure medium rust, which is one of my favourite colours from AK. I use it everywhere. I use it an awful lot. And this very much is a lighter, very sort of orangey brown colour, and works really well on these leathers. Now once I've got these main lights in place, I'm adding in a yellow tone, and here I'm using deep yellow to really build up these nice crisp yellowy highlights. So painting this yellow padding, I'd already undercoated with the brown and purple mix earlier, so again I do it as I go along. And the main colour I put on here, although it's hard to see in some of this because of the angle, is orange brown. And I map out most of the lights with that orange brown, leaving some of that darker colour showing. And then after that I come in with pure Sahara yellow, painting the main, what I call highlights. Now at the end I actually came back later on and added a bit of pale yellow in, which I didn't do here, to finish off the final highlights. Now moving into one of my favourite parts of the model here, which is all the little brass parts. Now when we're doing NMM, we get a lot of things that look quite similar, like gold, brass, and things like that. And the way I do it here, although I changed to a different part here in a minute because I knew this was hard to see. We go on to the back part. So what I've got here is that base colour is the same as what I used earlier, which was the darkish brown with some king purple in it, which gives this lovely tone. And what I come in with first of all here is medium rust to just map out where I think the metal is going to shine the most. And this secondary yellowy mix is basically chocolate with Japanese brown. Now I always go with this Japanese brown colour when I'm doing more brass than gold, because it's a more of a desaturated colour, but it's sort of got this sort of greenish tint to it, which tends to work better for brassy colours. Now if it was gold, I would just go straight with the Sahara yellow and get that much brighter, more saturated golden feel to it. But once I've got all that mapped out with that Japanese brown and chocolate colour, I then went to sort of more of a neat Japanese brown. And then I moved into more yellowy tones for the extreme highlights. So I've moved into Sahara yellow here, where I'm adding more and more of the sort of the yellowishness on top of this, and I build up those highlights with that. You can also see here I add little scratches and things. There's a big cross section of scratching on there, which I highlight the bottom edges only and the one side edge. We don't highlight all the way round, otherwise it tends to look a little bit kooky. So you pick one edge, usually the bottom edge, and highlight that. Now to finish off, I come in again with adding in pale yellow to get my brightest, whitest tones. So we don't go to white here, just adding in pale yellow. And this gives us more than enough intensity on these gold and brass sections. Now onto one of my favourite sections of this model, and it took forever to paint, I must say, which is the steel. Now the first, very simple to do, but took a long time. So the first thing I did was I base coated all the steel areas with dark sea blue. Now once I'd got that all in place, I come in with neat graphite, which is a really nice mid-tone grey, and I'll just show you here doing the sort of left power fist here. The way I do this is I line edge every part, and I also add areas where I think the shine is going to be the most. So you'll see there's some sort of chunkier bits of colour. Sorry about my hair getting in the way. And I build those areas up and I focus on those to be what we call our shine points. Now, one of the real keys to any NMM, and especially steel, I find it most important with steel, is that you have to leave those large sections of your darkest colour showing. So in this case, it's the dark sea blue. Now, you really need, on every single little element, you need small, sharp, really bright highlights, and you need large areas of the dark area to show. Now at the end here, I try and emphasize this by glazing back in with the dark sea blue. But as you can see, we get a really cool effect for this NMM steel. So on to another really cool part of this model is the gun. Now the gun is quite a focal point in the model because it's pointing forward and we sort of see it a lot. So I broke this up into sort of 3 sections to paint. Now I picked out what I would call the casing of the model, which is painted in a very similar way to how we did the sort of yellowy greens. Exactly the same colours in fact. Just painted slightly different. So the base colour was very much that ocean green and alga green again, and then I went pure alga green, and I painted this on quite light, quite thin, so I wanted very little transitions to show in the paint lines and get as smooth a finish as I can. So I built that up in several stages, pushing the colour towards the upper facing edges and all the main edges, and edge highlighted as well. I then moved on to adding yellow into this mix. Now I built this up again. Here I sort of did, it's more line highlighting more than anything. And as you can see, I try to move that light more towards the upper edges of the gun. Now I want those to stand out the most and be the parts that really gets picked out by the viewer's eyes. So one of the ways we do this in miniature painting, as you can see here, the top edges are really bright and larger, but the lower areas I highlight less and not as bright. Now the next section of the gun is what I would call the sort of black areas. Now there's a couple of little areas, mainly the handle and the stock part here, where I wanted a sort of like a rubbery black look. So on top of that dark sea blue, I've come in with pure graphite, but it was very thin. I thinned it right down so that it didn't leave very many brush lines or go on too opaque. I wanted this to be quite subtle because within this element we have contrasting colours, but we have also contrasts in saturation and intensity. So some parts we want to be not so bright, not so saturated, and other pieces we want to stand out and really catch the viewer's eye. Now we're doing the steel parts now, which is the next section, and this is done exactly the same way as I did all the other steel on the armour. I'm starting with my mid-tone colour of graphite, and I'm pushing that up all the upper edges, and then once I've got that all in place, I start adding in more and more snow blue, which is it's a gorgeous whitish blue colour, which I find works really well on steel and metals. And the final touch here is almost pure snow blue, where I'm just gonna pick out the very top edges and little spots. So as you can see on this little section here, I'm actually creating those little shine spots. Now the last section of the gun is some red sections. So again, this is all painted over dark sea blue. And I come in first of all here with a very sort of almost a Bordeaux red, which is called dirty red. Now it layers on very dark, but it's still got this beautiful red tone. Now once that's all in place and I've got all the highlight areas or lights mapped out, I then come in with pure matte red, and similar to the green, I start really edge highlighting most things. And pushing that red further and further to the top. Now the final stage here is cadmium red, which is it's a gorgeous orangey red color, and it works really nice for highlighting reds. And again, I push the highlighting on the edges as bright as I can. Now we get into painting the shield, and what a big beast of a shield this is. It's enormous. Now this has a lot of similarities, and it's a lot of reuse of things, colours and things we've already used. And yes, we could have painted it while we painted other areas, but quite often when a model is quite large like this, and this model is about 54 millimeters, he's quite a chunky boy. A lot of the times I find it much easier to paint things section by section rather than trying to replicate things all over a model, and then you can get sort of confused where you are and forget to paint certain bits that you're going to go back to. So I find it much easier to paint sort of each section at a time, even if it's the same color as another part. Now this green is same as the sort of yellowy green we did earlier. It's base coated. There's only 2 base coats on the whole model that I use throughout, and that is the ocean blue and alga green mix, and then the dark sea blue for the steel areas and the red areas. The final touches of this green here, I actually did something a little bit different. I came in with the dark sea blue very thinned down, and just glazed up into what I would call the shadowy areas, just to add a little bit more depth to some areas, to sort of help it stand out a little bit more and look maybe that little bit darker, because it's not like his cloth material. The next part I went on to paint was the red, and I've painted this exactly the same as I did the red on the gun. The only real difference here is because this is large flat areas, and this can cause a lot of problems for people when they have large flat areas. One way you can do this, I could have painted the whole thing dirty red and just edge highlighted everything, but I wanted to build up a bit of a sort of transition and a gradient on a couple of little parts. So as you can see with a couple of bits here, I'm coming in with the matte red now, but on the top part especially, like you can see, I've actually faded that red towards the top part of that element. Here you can see it. I just wanted to add a little bit more visual interest, as if showing that the light is really coming from the top, and that it's catching across that surface, and we're seeing some of that red come through. Now we're on to the steel parts, and again we've painted this a couple of times already, so this is exactly the same, but this time it is a little bit different because this is a lot of large flat areas, and what you see here is I've had to pick areas and spots where my imagination is telling me that the light is going to hit and bounce across this metal surface. And as you can see, what we usually work in is opposites. So the top left corner of that little slot thing and the bottom right corner, I've used those as the shine spots because they're very much opposite each other, and it gives us nice space to be able to leave those dark areas in between. So all of it now, I've sort of worked this as if the light is coming from the top left looking at the shield, so everything is slanting that way as you look at it. Now I build these up with more and more snow blue to get those final whitish highlights. Now the last section was going back to doing some brass. So I wanted to make this look a bit more of an older brass, so I don't add in the Sahara yellow this time. I very much build this colour up with chocolate brown and Japanese brown, and I add more and more Japanese brown in for subsequent mixes until I get to that pure Japanese brown colour, and then I start adding in pale yellow. It's not a huge difference, but with just the Japanese brown without the Sahara yellow, it makes this brass look a little bit older and maybe a little bit more worn and tarnished or whatever. So right here you can see I built up to my pale yellow, and I'm picking out little tiny dots, which are our little shine spots. But you can see the other panel that I did on the back of him here, and you can see that slight difference with the yellowing. Right, so we're on to the base now. Now, because it's meant to be a jungly type scene, I wanted to carry on with this ocean blue and alga green feel, which I think worked really well to give us that feeling of this guy in a jungle setting and the sort of colours of clothing and items he'd have if he was a jungle fighter. The only difference here is I added in a little bit of dark sea blue for the darker areas, which I wet blended all the 3 or 4 colours in to begin with, which is something I do a lot with bases, just to get a nice sort of transitioned colourful base. And for groundwork it works really well. You know, I quite often don't have to do any sort of highlighting on the groundwork. Now for the stone and rock areas here, I've come in with dark green grey, which again is a whitish grey, but a whitish green, but quite sort of greyish, and works very well for stones, rocks, and things like that, where we want to get a bit more of a natural feel. And these rocks I build up and build up with, and I add a little bit of snow blue in at the end to get the final highlights. Now the wood plank in here, I've again left the base colour as it is. I didn't underpaint these at all. I'm painting straight over with mud brown, which is a really good yellowy brown. I find it works really well for wood, especially old sort of deteriorated wood. It looks a little bit more because it's quite desaturated. And then I add in some tan earth or yellow into this to get some slightly lighter tones and build up the edges really near the ends of each of the planks. So as you can see here, I push the light towards the front here. So I'm not too worried about the back edges of a lot of these things. I really want to get the light pushing towards the front and showing where the model is going to be viewed from most of all. And certainly in pictures you're going to see that more than you are from the back of the model. Now once the wood is done, we're going to move on to the skulls. Now I've left them again with the dark, more of a dark sea blue base colour here, which is fine. And I've come in with a thinned down version of tan earth. Now I'm building up the main areas of light and the main colour of the model. Once I've got that all in place, I add buff to this, and then picking out the tops of the skulls. Now here's one of the things, it's sort of, this is quite a big jump in value here, so there's a little bit of separation of the colours. So once I'd got everything in place, I actually mixed an in-between mix of the two and blended those layers in between each other. You can see I'm doing now, just to smooth the transition between that sort of buff colour and the tan earth. So we get a little bit more of a smoother result, and then all we have to do is put some smaller highlights on. Now for the two big leaves on the base, I've come in first of all, again over the same base colour, very simple. I've got deep green first of all, which I paint all the sort of what we call the main lights, and then I add in a little bit of light green to add the final highlights to these leaves.